The morning Eva Brenner told preacher Aldous Holt she would never remarry was the same morning Jasper Monroe rode into Caldwell, Kansas with nothing but a bedroll, a bay horse, and the particular kind of stubborn hope that gets a man into more trouble than a rattlesnake in his boot. It was the autumn of 1878, and Caldwell sat on the edge of everything. The last proper town before the Cherokee Strip opened up into that vast, windswept nothing that men called opportunity and women called loneliness. The cattle drive still pushed through twice a year, stirring up the dust on Main Street and filling the saloons to bursting for a week before silence settled back over the place like a wool blanket. The railroad had reached Caldwell that very year, and with it came the sense that something was changing, that the old ways of the frontier were being pressed back by iron rails and telegraph wires, though nobody quite wanted to say it out loud. Eva Brenner was 31 years old, and she carried herself the way a woman carries herself when she has already survived the thing that was supposed to break her. She was not unkind. She was not cold, exactly. She was careful, the way a person becomes careful after touching a stove and deciding once was enough. Her husband, Thomas Brenner, had been a good man, a wheat farmer with steady hands and a laugh that rolled out of him like summer thunder. He had died 2 winters past, taken by a fever that moved through the county like something with a purpose, leaving behind Eva and their daughter, Clara, who was 7 years old and had her father's eyes and her mother's iron will. The farm still ran. Eva had seen to that. She had hired on a hand named Pete Dawes, a leathery old fellow who knew more about wheat than he knew about conversation, which suited them both fine. She had kept the accounts, made the decisions, negotiated the prices at Hennessy's grain store, and generally refused to allow grief the luxury of dismantling everything Thomas had built. People in Caldwell respected her for it. Some of the women pitied her. A few of the men had come around in the first year, hats in hand, eyeing the farm and the widow who came with it, and Eva had sent every last one of them back down her porch steps with a politeness so crisp it might as well have been a door slamming. Preacher Holt had been her husband's friend before he was her preacher, and so he felt it was his right to broach the subject on a Tuesday morning in October when Eva came to the church to arrange the flowers for the upcoming Harvest Sunday service. He was a round man with kind eyes, and the unfortunate habit of saying things out loud that most people had the good sense to think privately. "You know, Eva," he said, trimming the stem of a sunflower with pastoral confidence, "Thomas has been gone 2 years now. There are good men in this county." Eva kept her eyes on the wild asters she was arranging in the clay vase by the altar. "I know that, Aldous. A woman alone, running a farm, raising a child, managing perfectly well," she said, without sharpness, but with a finality that should have been sufficient. Preacher Holt was not a man who recognized finality when it was pointed at him. "I only mean to say that God did not design us for solitude. There would be no shame in preacher." Eva set down the asters and turned to look at him fully, and there was something in her face that was not anger but was related to it, the way a river is related to a flood. "I will not remarry. Not because I do not believe in love or in God's design, but because what Thomas and I had is not something I intend to replace with a man who wants a housekeeper and a deed to good farmland. So please, with all the respect I carry for you and for this church, let us speak no more of it." Preacher Holt opened his mouth, closed it, and nodded with the quiet defeat of a man who knows he has walked into a wall. Neither of them noticed the man in the third pew. He had come in quietly, the way a man comes in when he is not sure if he is welcome, but has decided to sit down anyway. He was lean in the way that men who work outdoors become lean, not thin, but carved down to what is essential. His hair was dark and wavy, worn a little long under a battered brown hat he had set on the pew beside him. His face was the kind of face that took the weather head-on and recorded it in fine lines around the eyes and at the corners of a mouth that seemed inclined toward something wry. He was 34 years old, though he looked like a man who had lived those years with considerable enthusiasm. Jasper Monroe had stopped into the church looking for directions to the Dawson Ranch, where he had been told there might be work for a man who knew cattle. He had not intended to overhear anything. But the church was small, and Eva Brenner's voice carried the kind of quiet conviction that does not require volume. He sat with his hat on the pew beside him, and he listened, and when Eva Brenner said she would never remarry, something in Jasper Monroe's chest did a thing it had not done in a very long time. It did not hurt exactly. It felt more like the moment just before a storm breaks, when the air changes and the horses lift their heads and everything in the world goes still and electric. He told himself it was none of his business. He picked up his hat. He walked out of the church into the bright October morning, found a boy on the street, asked about the Dawson Ranch, and got his directions. He rode out of town with every intention of putting the whole thing out of his mind. He did not succeed. The Dawson Ranch was 6 miles northeast of Caldwell, and Walt Dawson was a blunt-shouldered man of 50 who shook Jasper's hand and looked him over the way a man looks over a horse he is considering purchasing. He asked about his experience. Jasper had worked cattle drives out of Texas for 8 years, had wintered in Colorado, had spent a season in New Mexico before deciding the desert was spectacular but inhospitable, and he asked about his references, and Jasper provided names that Walt Dawson clearly recognized because his posture changed slightly when he heard them. "I can offer you bunk, meals, and $30 a month through the spring," Dawson said. Jasper said that was acceptable. He moved his things into the bunkhouse, met the other hands, a quiet young man named Russell, 2 brothers from Missouri called Heck and Del Carter, and an older Mexican vaquero named Domingo Reyes who had been working cattle since before Jasper was born, and who greeted him with the easy dignity of a man who had nothing to prove to anyone. That first evening, Jasper sat on the fence rail at the edge of the pasture and watched the sun go down over the Kansas plain, which it did in that part of the world with a particular extravagance, spreading orange and crimson and a deep bruised purple across a sky so wide it made a man feel simultaneously significant and very small. He thought about a woman with dark asters in her hands and a voice like a door softly closed. He told himself to stop thinking about it. He did not stop thinking about it. The following Sunday, Jasper Monroe rode into Caldwell and went to church. This was not, strictly speaking, unusual behavior. He was a man who had been raised to go to church on Sundays, and he had lapsed for some years in that discipline, and he told himself this was simply a return to proper habits. He had nothing to do with the fact that it was the only church in Caldwell, and the woman he had been thinking about for 6 days was presumably a regular attendant. He arrived early enough to take a seat in the 3rd pew, the same pew he had occupied on Tuesday, which he chose because it had a good sightline to the front, and not for any other reason he was willing to name. And he sat with his hat in his lap and looked at the cross on the wall and tried to be a man attending a church service. Eva Brenner came in with her daughter, Clara, who was a small, serious creature with a dark braid and enormous, solemn eyes. They took their seats in the 2nd pew on the left, and Jasper studied the hymnal with great attention. The service was Preacher Holt at his sincere best, a sermon on harvest and abundance and the grace of community, and Jasper found himself genuinely moved by parts of it, which surprised him, because he had not expected to feel much of anything in a church in Caldwell, Kansas. He expected to feel the particular awkward discomfort of a man who has come somewhere for reasons he cannot entirely justify. When the service ended and the congregation began to move toward the door, Jasper found himself in the stream of people shuffling out, and he was 3 feet from the door when a small voice said, "You stepped on my hat." He looked down. The little girl Clara was looking up at him with the measuring gaze of a child who has learned not to be impressed by adults prematurely. Her hat, a small straw affair with a blue ribbon, was indeed under his boot. He lifted his foot, picked up the hat, and crouched down to be at eye level with her. "I beg your pardon," he said. "I'm sorry about that." He examined the hat. "It seems all right. No permanent damage." "It was my good hat," Clara said, with the gravity of someone discussing a treaty. "It's still a fine hat," Jasper said seriously. He handed it back to her. A hand appeared at Clara's shoulder. A woman's hand, slender, with a small scar on the knuckle of the first finger, the kind of scar a person gets from farm work. Jasper straightened up. Eva Brenner was looking at him with the polite caution of a woman who is assessing an unfamiliar situation before deciding how to respond to it. Up close she was more arresting than he had anticipated, which was saying something, because he had spent 6 days building up a fairly detailed mental image. Her eyes were the color of deep river water, that particular shade that is not quite green and not quite gray, and there were fine lines at their corners from years of squinting into Kansas wind. Her hair was the dark brown of well-oiled saddle leather pinned up under a practical hat. She was not beautiful the way a painting is beautiful, but she was beautiful the way a good piece of land is beautiful, in a way that deepened the longer you looked at it. "I apologize for the hat," Jasper said. "I didn't see it fall." "No harm done," Eva said. Her voice was exactly as he remembered it. "Are you new to Caldwell?" "I am. Just started on at the Dawson Ranch last week." Something flickered in her expression, a slight adjustment, the way a person adjusts when they are recalibrating. "Walt Dawson's place?" "Yes, ma'am." "He's a fair employer," she said, and she said it the way someone says something that is true but is not the whole of the subject. "I'm Eva Brenner. This is my daughter, Clara." Jasper Monroe. He did not offer his hand because she had not offered hers, and he was not the kind of man who assumed. "I hope I'll see you both next Sunday." Clara was still looking at him with her evaluating gaze. "You have a very big horse," she said. Jasper glanced back at where his bay was tied at the post outside. "That's Buck," he said. "He's not as grand as he looks. He's actually quite cowardly about loud noises." Clara considered this information. "So is Mama's cat," she said finally, which seemed to be the beginning of some kind of acceptance. Eva's mouth did something it probably did not do very often, which was the beginning of a smile that she pulled back before it could fully arrive. "Come along, Clara," she said. "Good day, Mr. Monroe. Good day, Mrs. Brenner." He watched them walk down the church steps into the October sunlight. Clara chatting about the cowardly cat and Eva listening with her head bent slightly to one side. And Jasper Monroe stood in the church doorway and knew, with the certainty of a man who has fallen off enough horses to recognize the feeling on the way down, that he was in serious trouble. He went back to the Dawson Ranch and tried to focus on cattle. Caldwell in the autumn of 1878 was a place in the middle of its own transformation. The cattle trade brought money and noise, and a particular kind of rough commerce to the town, and the railroad's arrival that year had added another layer of ambition and chaos. There were saloons and a dry goods store and a hotel that was nicer than it had any right to be, a land office where men came to argue about property boundaries, a barber who was also the dentist in a manner that the town tried not to think about too hard, and the church, which Preacher Holt maintained as a counterweight to all the other establishments. There was also a small but persistent undercurrent of violence, the way there is in any place where men carrying guns and large amounts of money congregate in uncertain circumstances. The cattle drovers sometimes got into fights at the saloons. There had been 2 killings in the past year, both disputed, both troubling. The sheriff, a laconic man named Cal Briggs, managed the town with the particular weariness of a man who is slightly outnumbered but refuses to show it. Eva Brenner existed alongside all of this with the practiced steadiness of a woman who had decided that the world was going to be what it was going to be, and her job was to get her wheat to market and her daughter to school and herself through each day intact. She did not think about Jasper Monroe after their conversation in the churchyard. She was certain of this. She thought about him the following Wednesday when she was at Hennessy's grain store negotiating the price for next year's seed, and she saw him through the window, riding down Main Street on that large bay horse. Easy in the saddle, the way men are easy in a saddle when they have been riding so long it has become part of them. He was talking to Walt Dawson's other hand, the young one called Russell, and laughing at something, and the laugh changed his face completely, opened it up, made it younger and less guarded. She looked back at the grain ledger. She thought about him on Friday when Clara, in the course of a dinner conversation about nothing in particular, said, "The man from church has a horse named Buck. Did you know that?" "I didn't realize you remembered that," Eva said. "He said Buck was afraid of loud noises," Clara said thoughtfully, cutting her bread with the focused attention she brought to all manual tasks. "I wonder if Buck and our cat would be friends, since they're both afraid of things." "Animals don't choose friends based on shared fears," Eva said. Clara considered this with the philosophical seriousness she brought to all propositions. "Maybe people don't either," she said. Eva looked at her daughter, who was 7 years old and occasionally said things that landed like stones dropping into still water. "Eat your beans," Eva said. The second Sunday, Jasper was in the third pew again. He was there before Eva and Clara arrived, which she noticed because she was not looking for him and therefore noticed him immediately. He had made some effort. His shirt was clean. His boots showed signs of polish. His dark hair was combed back. He had the look of a man who was trying to appear as if he had made no particular effort, which meant he had made quite a lot. After the service, he did not manufacture an excuse to speak to her. He spoke to Preacher Holt, which she observed from the corner of her eye while saying good morning to Martha Hennessy, and then he spoke to Domingo Reyes, who had apparently also come to the service, and the two of them seemed to be having a conversation with the easy familiarity of men who work alongside each other and have found a rhythm. Eva found this marginally irritating, which told her something she was not sure she wanted to know. On the way home in the wagon, Clara said, "Mr. Monroe didn't talk to us today." "He has other people to talk to," Eva said. "He was talking to the old vaquero from the Dawson Ranch, Mr. Domingo." Clara adjusted her hat, which was the good one and which Eva had pinned with special care because of the previous week's incident. "Do you like Mr. Monroe, Mama? I barely know him." "But do you like him?" "Clara and Brenner, watch the road. I need you to tell me when we reach the fork." "You always say that when you don't want to answer," Clara said, with the devastating accuracy of a child who has had years to study one adult. Eva kept her eyes on the horse. "Watch for the fork." The next time Eva encountered Jasper Monroe outside of the church, it was unplanned and slightly catastrophic, in the small domestic way that farm emergencies tend to be catastrophic. It was a Thursday in late October, and one of Eva's draft horses, a big roan named Arthur, had gotten himself entangled in the fence wire on the north side of the wheat field. He was not hurt, but he was panicked, and a panicked draft horse is a considerable problem, and Pete Dawes had gone to town for supplies and would not be back until evening, and the wire needed 2 pairs of hands to manage safely, and Eva had tried for 20 minutes and the horse was only getting more distressed. She was contemplating the situation with her hands on her hips, and a string of thoughts she would not have said aloud in church when she heard hoofbeats on the road, and looked up to see Jasper Monroe riding along the fence line in the direction of the Dawson Ranch, which apparently took him past her property on Thursday afternoons. He saw her, and he saw the horse in the wire, and he changed course without being asked. He dismounted, assessed the situation in a single efficient sweep of his eyes, and said, "I'll hold his head. You work the wire." "I know how to hold my own horse," Eva said. "I'm sure you do. But he doesn't know me, and calming down for a stranger is more useful right now than being held by someone he trusts. Sometimes the unexpected works better than the familiar when an animal is this worked up." It was, Eva had to admit, a logical argument. "All right," she said. What followed was 15 minutes of careful, quiet work, with Jasper talking to the horse in a low, steady murmur, while Eva worked the wire free of Arthur's legs, with a patience she had to concentrate to maintain, because her hands were shaking from adrenaline. The horse calmed under Jasper's hands with an alacrity that was almost annoying, going from wild-eyed terror to a kind of resigned trust in the time it took Eva to get 3 of the wire coils free. When it was done and Arthur was loose and standing at the fence with the dignity of an animal pretending the whole thing had not happened, Eva straightened up with aching arms and looked at Jasper, who was still stroking the roan's nose. "Thank you," she said. "I would have managed." "I know you would have," Jasper said. He said it without qualification, without the patronizing reassurance that Eva was accustomed to from men who meant well. He said it the way you say something that is simply true. "You were heading to the Dawson Ranch, just coming back from an errand to town." He glanced at the sky, which was beginning to shade toward the amber of late afternoon. "I'm not in a hurry." Eva looked at the fence wire, which still needed to be properly repaired. She looked at Jasper Monroe, who looked back at her with an expression that was open and patient and entirely lacking in agenda, or at least in the visible display of one. "If you have wire pliers," she said carefully, "the fence needs mending before tomorrow." "I have wire pliers," Jasper said. They worked the fence together for another hour as the sun moved toward the horizon and the Kansas plain turned golden around them. Jasper mended wire with the competent ease of a man who had been working his hands his whole life, and Eva held sections and directed, and did not talk about anything important, and he matched her conversational rhythm with an instinct that she noticed and did not comment on. He asked about the farm, not with the assessing interest of a man calculating worth, but with the genuine curiosity of someone who found things interesting. How long had the family owned the land? Was the wheat variety good for this particular soil? Had she considered the south pasture for anything else? She answered. She asked about the cattle work. He told her about the drive seasons, about the vast orchestrated movement of thousands of animals across hundreds of miles, about the particular brotherhood of the trail that formed and dissolved each season like something temporary that everyone knew was temporary and valued more for it. "Did you always want to work cattle?" she asked. "No," he said. He said it simply, without elaborate explanation, and she did not push, because she understood the shape of things that a person does not say and respects when that shape is recognized. When the fence was done and the light was going fast, she said, "We have supper if you haven't eaten." She said it quickly and then looked at the fence post and then said, "Clara made biscuits this afternoon. She'll be pleased to tell someone about them at length." Jasper Monroe smiled, and it was the smile she had seen through the grain store window, the one that opened his face up like a window being thrown wide. "I'd be glad to hear about the biscuits," he said. Supper was cornbread, and the biscuits and a bean soup that Eva had left on the stove. And Clara was indeed delighted to provide a full account of the biscuit-making process to an attentive audience. Jasper listened to every detail about the correct ratio of lard and the importance of not overworking the dough with the seriousness of a man receiving field intelligence. "You could probably be a cook," Clara told him generously, "if you didn't want to do the cows anymore." "I'll keep it in mind," Jasper said. Eva watched him with her daughter across the supper table and felt something move in her chest that she had been deliberately not feeling for 2 years, and it frightened her in a way that the fence wire and the panicked horse had not. He left after supper, thanking her with a formality that she appreciated because it gave the whole evening the shape of a straightforward thing, a neighbor helping a neighbor, supper in return for labor, nothing to examine too closely. She examined it closely for half the night. In November, the pace of their encounters picked up by accretion rather than design. Jasper rode past her property often enough that it began to seem like it might not be a coincidence, and twice he stopped to help with things that needed 2 people. A gate post that had heaved up with the first frost, a wagon wheel that had come loose from its hub, and each time she offered supper and each time he stayed, and the suppers got longer, and the conversations moved more freely, and Clara began to treat him with the casual comfort of a child who has decided someone is acceptable. The other women in Caldwell noticed, of course. Women in small towns notice everything, not from malice but from the simple mathematical fact that small towns have limited events and people's behavior constitutes the primary entertainment. Martha Hennessy mentioned it to Eva with a kind of delighted caution over the dry goods counter one November afternoon. "People are talking about you and the Monroe Cowboy," Martha said. "People are welcome to talk about whatever they like," Eva said, examining a bolt of wool fabric. "He's well regarded. Walt Dawson says he's the best hand he's hired in 10 years. That's good for Walt Dawson." "He's not married," Martha offered. "Nor am I," Eva said. "How much is the wool by the yard?" Martha named the price and then said, with the careful delicacy of a genuine friend, "Are you happy, Eva?" Eva set down the fabric and looked at Martha Hennessy, who had been her friend since before Thomas died and who had helped her through those first terrible months with a practical kindness that Eva had never forgotten. "I am managing," she said. "That's not what I asked." Eva paid for her wool and went home. In December, Jasper Monroe asked her to walk with him after the Sunday service. He did not ask her in the church, in front of people, which she would have found pressuring and which she might have declined simply out of principle. He asked her as she and Clara were approaching their wagon, quietly, with his hat in his hands and a directness in his eyes that did not flinch. "Mrs. Brenner," he said, "I wonder if you'd be willing to walk with me down toward the creek before you head home. The ice is forming on the edges and Clara might like to see it. It's quite something." It was Clara inclusive, which was either very clever or very genuine, and Eva had been watching Jasper Monroe carefully enough by this point to believe it was genuine, which was both easier and harder than the alternative. "All right," she said, "for a little while." They walked down past the edge of town to where Bluff Creek ran shallow and clear between its banks, and the ice had indeed formed on the shallows in thin crystalline sheets that caught the pale December light and held it. Clara crouched at the bank with total absorption, touching the ice with one careful finger and reporting back on its properties with scientific thoroughness. Jasper and Eva stood a few feet back and watched her. "She's remarkable," Jasper said. "She's exactly like her father," Eva said, and then she said it and it sat between them, the mention of Thomas, the shape of his absence, and she waited to see what Jasper would do with it. He did not look away or change the subject. He said, "What was he like?" And she told him. She told him about Thomas Brenner's laugh and his patience, and the way he had a particular talent for growing things that went beyond farming into something almost philosophical, a genuine relationship with the soil. She told him about how Thomas had been afraid of lightning, which was a comic fear for a farmer on the Kansas plain, and how she had teased him about it, and how he had accepted the teasing with equanimity. She told him that Thomas had been a good man and a good father, and that his absence was a permanent wound that she had learned to live alongside rather than over. Jasper listened. He did not say Thomas sounded like a fine fellow in that hollow way people do. He did not try to fill the space that Thomas's name left with reassurances or deflections. He listened until she was done and then he said, "He must have loved you very much." "He did," Eva said, "and I him." She looked at the creek at Clara investigating the ice with a stick. "That's not something I expect to find twice." "No," Jasper said. "I don't suppose most people do." There was a pause, and in the pause something passed between them that was not yet named and was not yet asked for, only present, like the ice on the creek, something that had formed quietly in the cold without anyone directing it. "I heard what you told Preacher Holt," Jasper said. "In the church, the first morning I came to Caldwell." Eva went very still. "I thought I was alone. I was in the third pew. I came in for directions." He said it plainly, without apology or embarrassment, but with the steady look of a man who has decided that the only honest course is the direct one. "I heard you say you would never remarry." "I meant it," she said. "I know you did," Jasper said. "I'm not here to argue with it." She turned to look at him. "Then what are you here for?" He met her eyes without hesitation. "To know you," he said. "Just that for now, whatever that becomes." Eva Brenner had built very careful walls in 2 years of widowhood, and she had built them thoughtfully, and they were good walls. And what she felt in that moment was not the walls coming down, but rather the sensation of realizing that she had left a small door in one of them without quite knowing when. "That's an honest answer," she said finally. "I try to be," he said. Clara chose that moment to announce that the ice had spoken and demanded that both adults come look at a specific crystalline formation immediately. And they went, and the moment folded itself into the ordinary afternoon, but it stayed with Eva all the way home and into the evening, and she sat by the fire after Clara was asleep and looked at the flames for a long time and thought about doors. December deepened into a cold that had teeth. The Dawson Ranch was busy even in the winter. There was fence work and equipment maintenance, and the constant vigilance of cattle management in hard weather, and Jasper threw himself into the work with the competence and energy that had made him a valued hand wherever he went. He had settled into the rhythm of the bunkhouse, the daily conversation and occasional bickering of men sharing close quarters, and he had found a genuine liking for Domingo Reyes, who was the kind of man who says few things but makes each one worth hearing. One evening in December, when Jasper was cleaning his tack in the lamplight of the barn, Domingo came and sat on a hay bale nearby and smoked his pipe without saying anything for a while, which was his way of opening a conversation. "The wheat widow," Domingo said finally. "Eva Brenner," Jasper said. "She's not a widow in the way you mean it." "How do I mean it?" "As though she's waiting." Domingo puffed his pipe. "She's not waiting." Jasper ran the leather through the saddle soap and was quiet for a moment. "She's building," he said. "That's different." Domingo regarded him with the dark, placid eyes of a man who has seen many things and found most of them unsurprising. "You are serious," he said. "It was not a question." "More than I've been about anything in a long time," Jasper said. "She told the preacher she would not remarry," Domingo said, and the fact that he knew this told Jasper that the story had circulated through the community in the way such stories do. "The whole town knows." "I know she said it. And," Jasper looked at the piece of tack in his hands, "and I think she's a woman who means what she says," he said. "Which means that whatever might change her mind would have to come from inside her and not from me pushing on it. So I'm not pushing." Domingo puffed his pipe again. "That is either very wise," he said, "or very slow." "Probably both," Jasper said. Christmas came to Caldwell with a particular effort, as towns on the frontier tended to effort at Christmas, as though the holiday was proof of civilization, a thing to be demonstrated. The church put on a service with candles and a small choir and a creche that a family named Poole had donated, carved from local cedar by their eldest son. There was a town gathering in the meeting hall with a fiddle and a concertina and food brought by everyone. And the children had a pageant that Clara participated in as a speaking shepherd, a role she performed with the gravity of a Supreme Court justice. Jasper attended the church service, in the third pew, and afterward helped carry tables at the gathering and drank coffee, and talked to Walt Dawson about spring cattle plans, and talked to Preacher Holt about nothing in particular, and generally moved through the evening, with the ease of a man who has found his place in a community without making a production of it. He danced with Eva once, at the gathering, a simple square dance where the movements were prescribed by the caller, and there was nothing ambiguous about the closeness of it. And her hand in his was warm, and he did not hold it longer than the dance required. And he did not say anything during the dance about anything significant, and she was grateful. And at the same time she noticed that he smelled like wood smoke and cold air and leather, and that the hand holding hers was calloused and certain. "Thank you for the dance," she said, when the caller released them. "Thank you for accepting," he said, and there was a formality in it that was also warmth, and she walked away and stood beside Martha Hennessy and thought about the particular quality of a voice that says simple things simply. On Christmas morning, Eva found a small package on her porch, wrapped in brown paper and tied with a piece of twine. Inside was a book, a copy of David Copperfield, which she had mentioned once in passing during one of the fence-mending suppers, that she had read as a girl and always meant to own. There was no card, but there was a note tucked inside the cover that said only, "For the building." She stood on the cold porch in her shawl and held the book for a long minute, and then she went inside and put it on the mantelpiece where she would see it every day. January brought the worst of the winter weather, a stretch of brutal cold that kept everyone close to their hearths and made the cattle work genuinely dangerous. Jasper, on the other hand, spent long days in the cold moving cattle to sheltered areas and breaking ice on water troughs, and doing the thousand small acts of survival that winter on the plains demanded. During this time, Eva was managing her own farm through the cold, and Pete Dawes was there, reliable if taciturn, and Clara was home from school because the school teacher, a young woman from Ohio named Miss Gallagher, had declared the weather unsuitable for children walking to school, and so Clara was at home and underfoot and magnificently bored. Eva taught her to bake bread, which occupied them both for mornings. She taught her more of her letters and numbers. She told her stories in the evening, stories about her own childhood in Missouri, about the wagon journey west when Eva was a young woman, about Thomas's courting of her, which Clara demanded in every detail with the appetite of a child for family mythology. "Did you know right away that you loved Papa?" Clara asked one evening. "No," Eva said. "I thought he was very kind, and then I thought he was interesting. And then one day I realized that interesting and kind had turned into something larger without my noticing. Like how water gets deep gradually," Clara said. "Something like that, yes." Clara looked at the fire. "Do you think you could love someone else?" She said with the directness of a child who does not know she is asking a hard question, or possibly knows exactly and is asking anyway. Eva looked at her daughter's profile, the firelight moving across her small, serious face. "Why do you ask that?" "Because I think Mr. Monroe is interesting and kind," Clara said, with the simplicity of a person presenting evidence. Eva did not answer for a moment. Then she said, "Go to sleep, Clara Ann." Clara went to sleep. Eva sat with the fire and the question. In February, the weather broke enough for movement, and Caldwell breathed out with the collective relief of a community that had gotten through something hard. People appeared on the streets again with the slightly dazed gladness of animals emerging from winter quarters, blinking at the weak sun. Jasper came to the farm on a Saturday morning, which was a departure from his usual pattern of encountering Eva by circumstance. He knocked at the door directly, which was another departure, and when Eva opened it, he stood on the porch with his hat in his hands and a look of determined composure, like a man who has made up his mind about something. "Good morning," he said. "I wonder if Clara would like to see the Dawson horses. There are 2 foals from last spring that are well grown now and quite friendly. I thought she might enjoy it." "You'd be welcome too, of course." It was an invitation for Clara that was also an invitation for Eva, and it was offered without pressure, and Eva stood in her doorway in the thin February light and looked at Jasper Monroe and thought about rivers and depth and gradual things. "Give me 10 minutes," she said. They rode out to the Dawson ranch in Eva's wagon, with Buck tied to the back, Clara between them on the seat, asking questions about the foals with the focused interest she brought to all animal subjects. The Dawson ranch was large and well kept, the barn stout against winter, the cattle visible in the pastures as dark moving shapes on the pale grass. Walt Dawson met them in the yard with the reserved pleasure of a man who is not effusive but is genuinely welcoming, and Clara was introduced to the foals, a dark bay colt and a small gray filly, and spent the better part of an hour in the stall with Domingo Reyes, who had a profound and inexhaustible patience with children that surprised Eva and did not seem to surprise Jasper. "He has grandchildren in New Mexico," Jasper said, standing at the fence with Eva while they watched Domingo teach Clara to offer her palm flat with grain. "He talks about them every evening." "Does he have family here?" "No, that's the hardest thing about this kind of work. You're always somewhere that isn't home." He said it without self-pity as an observation. "And where is home for you?" Eva asked. "I don't think I've asked you that directly." Jasper was quiet for a moment, looking at the pasture. "I had a place in Texas," he said. "My brother and I were going to build a ranch. He died, fever, 3 years ago." She felt the parallel even as he said it, the way grief has geography, the way it takes up residence in specific places and removes them. "I'm sorry," she said. "He was a good man," Jasper said. "Better than me, probably. After that, I just kept moving, kept working. The Dawson Ranch is the longest I've stayed anywhere in 3 years." "Because of the work?" she asked. He turned to look at her, and the look was direct and clear and undeflected. "Because of Caldwell," he said. She held his gaze for a moment and then looked back at the pasture where Clara was laughing at something Domingo had said, her whole face transformed by it into uncomplicated joy. "I am afraid," Eva said quietly, to the fence post and to Jasper and to the pale sky and to no one in particular. "I want you to know that." "So am I," Jasper said. "For the record." "Of what?" "Of needing something I'm not sure how to ask for properly," he said. "Of having found something that matters and not knowing if it will stay." The horses breathed steam in the cold air. Clara's laughter came across the yard like a sound from some other season, warmer and certain. "We should take it slowly," Eva said. "Whatever pace you need," Jasper said. "I'm not going anywhere." Spring came to Caldwell with the particular cruelty of Kansas springs. 3 warm weeks that convinced everyone the winter was truly done, followed by a late ice storm that killed 3 of Walt Dawson's young cattle and 2 of Eva's wheat seedlings that she had been nursing in the kitchen window. But after that the warmth returned and stayed, and the wheat came up properly in the field, and the air smelled of mud and possibility. The pace of Jasper and Eva's time together changed in the spring, gradually, like everything else between them. He came to the farm on Sunday afternoons when the work at Dawson's allowed it, and sometimes on Saturday evenings, and they sat on the porch while the light went long and golden across the wheat field, and Clara played in the yard, and they talked about everything and nothing, about the land, and the work and books and memories, and the 10,000 small things that 2 people who are learning each other talk about. He told her about his childhood in East Texas, about his father who had been a hard man but a fair one, about his mother who had died when he was 12, and whose absence had shaped him in ways he was still discovering. He told her about the trail drives, the specific geography of the cattle routes, the particular cast of men he had worked alongside, their virtues and their failures, and the strange, tender loyalty that formed in harsh conditions. She told him about her own life, all the parts of it, with the careful honesty she applied to everything. She told him about the early years of her marriage to Thomas, the building of the farm from raw land, the first years of struggle and the gradual solidification of it into something real. She told him about Thomas's death in a way she had not told anyone, not even Martha Hennessy, not entirely the specific terror of those fevered days, the moment she knew it was over, the first morning she woke up after, and had to decide what kind of woman she was going to be without him. Jasper listened to all of it. He never rushed her and he never looked away. One April evening, when the sunset had gone spectacular over the wheat field, turning everything a burnished amber that made the world look like something painted by someone with too much gold, Jasper reached across the porch rail and took Eva's hand. She let him. She turned her hand over under his and held it, and they sat looking at the sunset, and nothing was said, and nothing needed to be said, and Clara, playing in the yard, looked up and saw and looked away again with the satisfied expression of a child who has been right about something. It was May when the trouble came, because trouble generally waits for things to go well before it arrives. A man named Garrett Voss rode into Caldwell on a Tuesday, and he was the kind of man that a town like Caldwell learned to watch carefully and quickly, big, watchful, with the particular dangerous stillness of a man who has been in places where stillness was necessary for survival and has never been able to shed it. He had ridden up from Indian Territory, and he had money, and he spent it in the saloons, and he asked questions about the area that were not quite the right questions for a man merely passing through. It came out, eventually, the way these things come out in small towns, that Garrett Voss was a land speculator of the most aggressive kind, representing a group of investors from back east who had identified the wheat country around Caldwell as prime acquisition territory. They were not interested in buying land at fair prices. They were interested in pressure. Voss came to Eva Brenner's farm on a Wednesday afternoon in May, which was unlucky for him, because Pete Dawes was there, and Pete Dawes was a small man who looked like a strong wind would knock him over, and who had the temper of a stepped-on cat. Eva sent Pete to see to the horses and talked to Voss on the porch herself. He was polite enough, in the surface way of men whose politeness is a tool rather than a quality. He made his offer a price for the farm that was below value and above insult, calibrated to seem reasonable while being neither. He talked about opportunity and development, and the changing frontier in terms that Eva recognized as a prepared speech. When he was done, she said, "No, thank you." He looked at her with the recalibrating expression of a man who had expected a different response. "Mrs. Brenner, I want you to understand the full picture here. The railroad development in this county is going to change land values significantly. Your position as an independent operator." "My position as an independent operator is that my farm is not for sale," Eva said. "Good day, Mr. Voss." He left, but with the specific quality of departure that suggests a thing not concluded. That evening, Eva rode to the Dawson Ranch, which she had never done before, and found Jasper in the barn and told him about the visit. She did not tell him because she needed him to fix anything. She told him because he was the person she wanted to tell. He listened. He asked questions about what Voss had said, about his manner, whether he had threatened. He did not immediately leap to heroic posturing, which was one of the things about Jasper Monroe that Eva found consistently valuable. "He'll be back," Jasper said. "Men like that don't take one no." "I know. Have you talked to Cal Briggs?" "The sheriff, what would I tell him? A man made me an offer I declined. That's commerce, not crime." Jasper thought about this. "Briggs should know about it anyway. Voss isn't the only one he's likely visiting. If he's buying up land in this county, there will be patterns." "I can talk to Cal Briggs myself," Eva said. "I know you can," Jasper said. And there it was again, that simple acknowledgement that never failed to settle something in her. "I'd just like to know you're not carrying this alone." "I'm not," she said. "I'm telling you." Something crossed his face then, something open and moved and quickly controlled. "Yes," he said. "You are." Sheriff Cal Briggs was indeed aware of Garrett Voss, it turned out, and had been keeping an eye on his movements since he arrived. He had received reports from 2 other landowners in the county about similar offers, and he had wired to the territorial marshal about Voss's activities in Indian Territory, which had not been entirely above reproach. He thanked Eva for coming in, and told her to document everything, and come back if Voss's manner changed from pressure to threat. Voss came back to the farm a week later, on a morning when Pete Dawes was in town, and Jasper happened, genuinely happened, this time, without design, to be riding past on his way back from an errand to the farrier in Caldwell. He saw the unfamiliar horse at Eva's gate and recognized it as the one he had seen Voss riding, because he had made it his business to know what Voss's horse looked like, and he turned in without ceremony. He arrived at the porch to find Eva and Voss in a conversation that had moved from polite to something edged. He dismounted, tied Buck, and came up to the porch without haste. "Morning," he said, easily to both of them. Voss looked at him with the measuring gaze of a man accustomed to sizing up opposition. "This a private conversation." "Looks like you're at Mrs. Brenner's farm," Jasper said pleasantly. "Hard for conversations here to be private from Mrs. Brenner." Eva did not look at Jasper, but he saw the slight easing of her posture. "Mr. Voss was just leaving," she said. Voss looked between them. He was the kind of man who read situations quickly and drew accurate if not always welcome conclusions. He looked at the set of Jasper's shoulders, and at the way Eva Brenner stood on her own porch and decided, correctly, that this particular morning was not going to yield results. "I'll come again when you've had time to consider," Voss said to Eva. "My answer won't change," Eva said. He left. Eva and Jasper stood on the porch until the sound of his horse faded. Then Eva let out a breath that was longer than a normal breath by several counts. "Are you all right?" Jasper asked. "He was suggesting I couldn't maintain the farm long-term on my own," Eva said. He phrased it as concern. "That's a particular kind of cruelty," Jasper said, with an anger in his voice that was quiet and controlled but unmistakably real. "Using someone's circumstances against them and calling it care." "Yes," she said. She looked at her hands. "I am not afraid of him," she said. "I want to be clear about that. I am angry." "Good," Jasper said. "Angry is appropriate." Voss made one more attempt, this time at the grain store in front of witnesses, approaching Eva with a document that purported to be a formal offer and making noises about legal processes regarding unencumbered estates, which was a legal position with questionable merit but considerable intimidation potential. Eva told him in front of 6 people, including Preacher Holt and Martha Hennessy and Walt Dawson, that if he came to her farm or accosted her in public again, she would take the matter to the territorial marshal herself. And she said it with such crystalline composure that the 6 witnesses all found reasons to be standing nearby when Voss turned and walked out of the store. Cal Briggs, armed with the wire response from the territorial marshal and 3 formal complaints from county landowners, informed Garrett Voss 2 days later that his continued presence in Caldwell was no longer welcome, and outlined the legal basis for this invitation with the laconic authority that was Briggs's particular gift. Voss rode out of Caldwell on a Thursday and did not return. The incident had a particular effect that Eva did not entirely anticipate, which was that it clarified something in her. Standing on the grain store floor and facing down Garrett Voss with the clean anger of someone defending something real, she understood with sudden precision what she was defending and why, and that the farm was not just land and wheat but a life she had built and chosen, and that she would continue to build and choose, and that this did not preclude but was not incompatible with other things she had begun, gradually and carefully, to want. She thought about all of this on the ride home, with Clara beside her on the wagon seat talking about the grain store incident with the vivid interest of a child who has witnessed her mother be formidable. "You were magnificent, Mama," Clara said. "I was appropriate," Eva said. "Same thing," Clara said. That Sunday after the service, instead of waiting for Jasper to make whatever careful offering he had prepared, Eva walked to where he was standing by the church door talking to Domingo Reyes, and she said, "Would you like to take supper with us tonight?" Jasper looked at her. "Clara wants to teach you to make the cornbread," Eva said. "She's been planning it for 2 weeks." "I would be honored," Jasper said. Domingo Reyes looked at his pipe and said nothing, but his expression was that of a man whose patience has been vindicated. The cornbread supper was loud and flour-dusted and considerably more chaotic than the usual Sunday supper, largely because Clara's teaching style involved extensive demonstration and commentary, and the occasional revision of previous instructions, and the cornbread that resulted was somewhat irregular in shape, but entirely correct in taste, and Jasper ate 2 pieces, and declared it the finest cornbread in the state of Kansas, with conviction that bordered on theological certainty. After Clara was in bed and the kitchen was put to rights, Eva and Jasper sat at the kitchen table with the last of the coffee and the quiet of a house where a child is sleeping and the evening has gone completely dark. "I need to tell you something," Eva said. Jasper set down his coffee cup and gave her his complete attention, the way he always did, with that quality of stillness that was not passivity but presence. "What I told Preacher Holt," she said. "What I said about not remarrying. I said it because I meant it at the time. And I meant it because I was afraid of the thing I meant, of replacing Thomas, of pretending that one person can be swapped for another, of making a practical arrangement and calling it love. Jasper said nothing, waiting. "What you are," Eva said, looking at the table and then lifting her eyes to his face, "is not that. You are not a replacement and you are not an arrangement. You are—" She stopped. She considered her words with the precision she brought to everything important. "You are something I did not expect and am not fully prepared for and cannot talk myself out of. And I have tried, so you should know that I have tried." Jasper Monroe's face, which had been carefully composed, did something that was very nearly undoing. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his, and he said, in a voice that was low and certain, "Eva, I have been in love with you since a Tuesday in October when I heard you tell a preacher that you would never remarry, and I thought, there is a woman who knows exactly what she wants, and I would like to spend a great deal of time in the vicinity of that kind of certainty." She looked at him for a long moment. "That is a very peculiar reason to fall in love with someone. It's the honest one," he said. She turned her hand over under his and held it, the way she had on the porch in April, and this time the gesture was different, charged with what had been named now, warm with it. "I am still afraid," she said. "I want you to know that too." "I know," he said. "Me too. But I am not going to let that be the only thing I feel," she said, "because I am tired of only being careful." Jasper Monroe stood up from the kitchen table and came around it, and Eva stood too, and he took her face in both his hands with the reverence of a man handling something he knows to be irreplaceable, and he kissed her with a gentleness that was also somehow complete, and the kitchen of the Brenner farm was entirely quiet around them except for the tick of the clock and the settling of the house. When she stepped back, her eyes were bright. "I still think we should take things slowly," she said. "Whatever pace you need," he said. "You keep saying that," she said. "Because I keep meaning it," he said. Summer in Caldwell was a full and busy season. The wheat ripened and the harvest came, and it was a good harvest. The best Eva had seen in 3 years, and Pete Dawes, and a hired crew brought it in over 10 days of long, hot work. And Jasper came on 2 of those days, because the Dawson Ranch had lighter demands on its hands in that period, and Walt Dawson told him to go ahead with the cheerful gruffness of a man who has figured out what is happening and approves of it. Jasper in the wheat field, working with the focused efficiency that characterized everything he did physically, was something Eva observed from the edge of the field one afternoon, and filed away in the specific collection of memories she was building without entirely admitting to herself that she was building it. He had taken off his hat, and his dark hair was wet with sweat, and he was talking to Pete Dawes about something that made the old man bark out a laugh, which was rare enough to be remarkable. The harvest supper that Eva put on for the crew was an event: long tables outside, everything the kitchen could produce, cider from the barrel she had put up in the fall. The crew ate with the appetite of men who have earned their hunger, and Domingo Reyes attended because Jasper had invited him, and Clara insisted he sit beside her, because she had questions about horses that would not wait. It was a good evening, golden and loud and complete in itself, and when the crew had gone and Pete had retired to his quarters over the barn and Domingo had ridden back toward the Dawson Ranch, Jasper stayed to help carry the last of the dishes inside, which gave them a small window of late evening quiet in the kitchen while Clara slept upstairs. "Good harvest," Jasper said, stacking plates at the counter. "Very good," Eva said. She was looking at the window at the dark outside. "Jasper." "Yes," she turned. "Walt Dawson offered you a year contract, Domingo told me." A brief pause. "He did. Are you going to take it?" Jasper set down the plates and turned to face her. "That depends," he said carefully, "on some things I don't yet know the answer to." "What things?" "Whether there is something in Caldwell worth staying for," he said. "Something that wants me to stay." Eva crossed the kitchen and stood in front of him, looking up at him with those river-colored eyes that he had never gotten used to and did not expect to. "I would like you to stay," she said. "Not for me, I mean yes for me, but not only for me. For yourself, because this is a good place and you are good at what you do here and I would like you to stay." "Then I'll take the contract," he said. She reached up and touched his jaw with her palm, and he closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them she was still looking at him with that quality of attention that always made him feel like the most important thing in the room. "Stay for supper Sunday," she said. "Every Sunday. I am done being careful about that." "Every Sunday," he agreed. He took the year contract with Walt Dawson. The days got shorter and the air went gold and cool again, autumn returning to the Kansas plain with its usual extravagance, and Jasper Monroe was there for all of it. He was there when Clara came home from school in September, having received a perfect mark on her arithmetic examination, and needed to tell someone about it in detail immediately. He was there when Eva's cat, a ginger animal of supreme self-regard named Governor, fell off the porch rail into the rose bush and emerged offended but uninjured. He was there on a windy October evening when the windmill needed a part replaced, and he and Pete Dawes worked on it by lantern light, while Eva held the lantern and handed them tools and the wind threw everything around, and made the whole enterprise feel like the frontier adventure it technically was. He was there on Sunday evenings when Caldwell was quiet and the farm was quiet and Clara was asleep, and he and Eva sat on the porch with coffee or sometimes cider, watching the star-extraordinary Kansas sky, and talked about everything they were and everything they were becoming. In October, 1 year after he had ridden into Caldwell and sat in the third pew, Jasper Monroe proposed to Eva Brenner. He did not do it theatrically. He was not a theatrical man. He did it on a Sunday evening in October on the porch, as the stars were coming out over the wheat field, and he did it having thought about it for a very long time and having been, for the past several months, as certain as he had ever been of anything. He turned to her and said, "I want to ask you something, and I want you to know that whatever you say, it doesn't change where I stand or what I am to you. I'm not asking out of pressure or circumstance or any reason other than the simple fact that I love you and I want to spend my life with you and with Clara, and I would like to be asked and not just assumed." Eva went very still. "Will you marry me?" he said. "When you're ready, on your terms, however it looks, that's the question." The wind moved through the wheat. The stars were very bright. A coyote called somewhere out in the dark beyond the pasture and then was quiet. Eva Brenner looked at Jasper Monroe, this man who had come into her life through a church door and a third pew and the particular stubbornness of hope, and she thought about Thomas, whom she had loved completely and would love always, and she thought about rivers and depth and gradual things, and she thought about the small door she had not known she had left in the wall, and she thought about Clara saying interesting and kind with the simple clarity of a child who has not yet learned to be complicated about truth. "Yes," she said, "on my terms." "On your terms," he said. She leaned against him, which she had done before, but not with this settled, claimed quality, as if the posture was now allowed to mean what it had always meant. His arm came around her and held her with the steadiness that was the central fact of him. "I told Preacher Holt I would never remarry," she said after a while. "I heard you," Jasper said. "I was in the third pew." "You are an extremely stubborn man," she said. "You are worth being stubborn for," he said. And because he was Jasper Monroe and not inclined to leave important things unsaid, he added, "I love you, Eva. I love all of it. Your farm and your daughter and your iron will and your cornbread and the way you argue with Preacher Holt and the way you stood up to Garrett Voss and the way you love Thomas's memory without it being the only thing you are. I love all of it." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I love you. That's the first time I've said it directly." "I know," he said. "It sounds like you mean it." "I do," she said. "Exactly as much as I mean everything." They told Clara the next morning at breakfast, and Clara received the information with the gravity she reserved for significant events, sitting very still with her hands folded on the table and her serious dark eyes moving from one adult face to the other. "You're going to marry Mr. Monroe," she said. "That's right," Eva said. "If that's all right with you." Clara looked at Jasper with the full force of her assessment. "You're staying," she said. "I'm staying," Jasper said. Another pause. Then Clara said, "Can we still name the gray filly? Mr. Domingo said I could name her." "I think Mr. Domingo would be honored to have you name his filly," Jasper said. Clara nodded with executive decisiveness. "Then yes," she said, "that's all right with me." Eva looked at her daughter and then at Jasper and found herself laughing, which she did not do enough and which transformed her face in a way that made Jasper Monroe feel like the luckiest man in Kansas, which he privately believed he might be. They were married in December, on a Saturday, in the church in Caldwell where he had first sat in the third pew on a Tuesday in October, and heard a woman declare the terms of her own life with such clear-eyed conviction that he had been helpless against it ever since. Preacher Holt performed the ceremony with a warmth that only slightly undermined his earlier position on the matter, and if he was aware that he was officiating at a wedding he had arguably helped catalyze by having the wrong conversation at the wrong time, he was gracious enough not to say so. The church was full. Martha Hennessy cried, which she would have denied under questioning. Domingo Reyes attended in his good coat and stood in the back pew, and had the expression of a man who has watched something develop over a long period and is satisfied by its completion. Walt Dawson attended with his wife and shook Jasper's hand before the service with the warmth of a man who had known this was where things were headed and had arranged his cattle schedule accordingly. Pete Dawes came in from the farm scrubbed to an unusual degree of shininess and sat in the fourth pew with his hat on his knee and looked profoundly uncomfortable for the duration of the ceremony in the way of men who are moved by things but have not developed the vocabulary for it. Clara stood beside her mother at the altar and held the bouquet, which was winter holly and cedar and dried wheat flowers, and she held it with enormous care and watched the proceedings with the solemnity of an official witness. Eva wore a dress that Martha Hennessy had helped her make, a deep blue wool that was as fine as anything Caldwell could offer, and her dark hair was pinned up with care, and she was more beautiful to Jasper Monroe at that moment than she had ever been in the year he had spent learning her, not because of the dress or the occasion, but because of the quality of the look she turned on him when he came to stand beside her, which was open and committed and entirely herself. The vows were the traditional ones. When it came to the part about forsaking all others, Preacher Holt paused, not unkindly, and Eva said the words with a fullness that did not deny what had come before, but did not hide behind it either, and Jasper said his with the unhurried certainty of a man who has no reservations left. When Preacher Holt said he might kiss the bride, Jasper cupped Eva's face in his hands and kissed her with a gentleness that made Martha Hennessy cry harder, and Clara, holding the bouquet with both hands, allowed herself a very small private smile of the sort that children allow when they have been right about something, and everyone has finally caught up. The winter celebration afterward at the meeting hall had the festive quality of a community that has decided it wants to be happy about something, and is being happy about it without reservation. The fiddle and concertina players were there, and people danced and ate, and there was cider and something stronger for those who wanted it, and the conversation was warm, and the room was warm, and Caldwell, for an evening, was the best version of itself. Jasper danced with Eva twice, once with the formal pleasure of the square dance and once in a waltz, slow and close, and she danced with him without counting the steps, which she always had before. He danced with Clara too, swinging her in circles until she was breathless with laughter, and the look on Eva's face watching them was the look of someone who has arrived somewhere and recognized it as the right place. The years that followed were the building years, and they built well. Jasper Monroe, by spring of the following year, had left the Dawson Ranch to work the Brenner farm alongside Eva full-time, which Walt Dawson had seen coming and graciously accepted, offering Jasper part-time consulting work during the cattle season that gave him income and connection to the work he loved, without requiring him to be gone for the long stretches of the trail drives. Domingo Reyes would come by on occasion, ostensibly to discuss cattle matters with Jasper, actually because Clara had somehow become one of his favorite people in the world, and he was teaching her to work with horses in a way that made Eva simultaneously nervous and proud. Pete Dawes stayed on, gradually relaxing into his role in a household that was now larger and louder, and occasionally he would do something unexpectedly generous, fixing a gate without being asked, leaving vegetables from a kitchen garden he had started behind the barn, teaching Clara to whittle in 20-minute sessions that he approached with the same spare seriousness he brought to everything. By the second year of their marriage, Eva knew she was expecting, and she told Jasper on a Tuesday morning in the kitchen over coffee, simply and directly, watching his face as she said it. His face did what it had done the first time he kissed her, opened completely, all the composed steadiness replaced by something raw and bright and entirely unguarded. He was out of his chair and had her in his arms before she had finished speaking, and she could feel him exhale against her hair in a long breath that had been held for a long time. "Are you well?" he asked, pulling back to look at her. "I'm very well," she said. Clara, coming in from the yard for breakfast, assessed the situation with her 11-year-old practicality and said, "Are you having a baby?" Eva and Jasper looked at each other. "Yes," Eva said. Clara sat down and considered her eggs. "I hope it's a boy," she said. "I've already had years of practice being the serious, sensible one. A brother would be interesting." "You might not get to choose," Eva said. "I know," Clara said. "I'm just stating a preference." The baby was born in the autumn of 1880, 2 years after Jasper Monroe had ridden into Caldwell with a bedroll and a bay horse, and the kind of stubborn hope that changes things. He was a boy, which Clara received with the satisfaction of a verified preference, and he arrived in the world with a pair of lungs that demonstrated immediately that the Monroe contribution to the family would be considerable. They named him Thomas William Monroe Thomas for Eva's first husband, because she had asked Jasper and Jasper had said yes without hesitation, with the understanding of a man who knows that love is not diminished by honoring what came before it. William was Jasper's father's name. Clara held her brother the morning after he was born with the reverent care of a person handling something fragile and important, and she looked at his small red face with an expression that Eva recognized as the same one Clara had used to evaluate strangers in church, measuring, careful, and ultimately inclined toward acceptance. "Hello, Thomas," Clara said. "I'm your sister. I'm going to teach you everything." "Give him a few months first," Jasper said. "Planning ahead," Clara said, and did not relinquish the baby. The farm grew in the way that good things grow, not overnight, not dramatically, but steadily, with the accumulated investment of daily work and good decisions, and the luck that tends to find people who have put themselves in a position to receive it. Jasper had an instinct for the business side that complemented Eva's operational precision, and together they expanded the wheat operation and added a small cattle herd. Nothing grand, 15 head that they ran on the south pasture, which justified the regular consultation visits from Domingo Reyes, and gave Clara her first real experience of working cattle, alongside the old vaquero, with a patient confidence that made Jasper quietly proud every time he watched her. They added a proper barn in 1881, the old one having served its purpose but being no longer adequate, and the barn raising was a community event of the kind that Caldwell still managed, neighbors coming for 2 days of work and noise and collective effort, with Eva feeding 30 people and Jasper directing the construction and Pete Dawes outworking men half his age with a competitive ferocity that became the subject of considerable amusement. Preacher Holt came to the barn raising, as he came to everything in the county that required community, and he found a moment to speak to Eva privately, which he had clearly been working up to for some time. "I want to say something," he said, in the way of a man who has rehearsed. "Go ahead, Aldous," Eva said. "I was wrong back in the beginning to push you on the subject of remarrying. What I should have said is that you were capable of knowing your own mind and heart, and that whenever and if ever you found something worth finding, you would find it and know it." Eva looked at him with the genuine warmth she felt for this man who was frequently imprudent and always sincere. You were also the incidental cause of everything that happened, she said, so I can't be entirely angry with you. How do you mean? Preacher Holt said. Jasper heard what I said to you, in the church, that Tuesday. Preacher Holt was quiet for a moment. Did he? He was in the third pew, Eva said. He had come in for directions. Preacher Holt considered this information with the expression of a man experiencing a theological reconsidering. Providence, he said finally. Something like that, Eva said, and walked back to the work with the ease of a woman who knows where she stands. By 1882, Clara was 13 and had grown tall and grave and capable. With Thomas Brenner's eyes and Eva Monroe's spine, and her own particular quality of still assessment that made adults involuntarily straighten up when she looked at them. She could work a horse with skill that made Domingo Reyes nod in his highest expression of approval, and she could do the farm accounts, and she read everything she could get her hands on from the Caldwell Lending Library, which had been established by a group of determined women including Eva and Martha Hennessy in 1881. Thomas Monroe was too and furiously in motion, having learned to walk at 10 months and never quite recovered from the discovery of how much world there was to fall into. He had Jasper's dark hair and Eva's river-colored eyes, and an expression of cheerful determination that he wore even when tumbling off the porch steps, which he did with a frequency that aged Pete Dawes perceptibly. Life in Caldwell was changing, the way life changes in places that are growing more families. A second church, a school expansion, the beginnings of something that would eventually be called a town proper rather than a frontier settlement. The old wildness was retreating before the slow advance of fences and railroads and legal structures, and this was a loss and a gain simultaneously, the way most changes are, and people felt both things and argued about both things, and the town went on regardless. Jasper Monroe watched the changes with the particular gaze of a man who has seen the frontier in all its phases, and knows it for something temporary even as he loves it for what it is. He was not sorry to see some of it go, the arbitrary violence, the lawlessness that hurt the vulnerable far more than the powerful, the particular injustice of it that he had always been aware of even if he had not always known what to do about it. He had seen enough of what had happened to the peoples who had lived on this land before the frontier arrived to carry a consciousness of it that he could not put down, even if there was little he could do beyond the immediate sphere of his own decency. He made sure of some things within that sphere. He was fair to Pete Dawes and to the men he worked with, regardless of their origins. He had stood up for Domingo Reyes when a drunk drover at the grain store said something contemptible about Mexicans, and discovered that Jasper Monroe had a quiet and effective way of making his disagreement clear. He taught Clara that these things mattered, and she received the teaching with the seriousness she brought to everything important and filed it alongside the arithmetic and the horsemanship. One evening in the autumn of 1882, Jasper and Eva were on the porch in the late light, which was a place and a time they had made their own, and Thomas was asleep and Clara was inside reading, and the wheat field was gold in the last sun, and Caldwell was quiet in the way it got quiet when the day was well spent. Eva was leaning against Jasper's shoulder, which she did now without thinking about it, with the ease of 4 years of practice. His arm was around her, which he did without thinking, with the ease of the same. They had had a full day, a cattle negotiation in the morning, the accounts in the afternoon, a magnificent battle with young Thomas about the necessity of vegetables at dinner, an evening walk around the farm that had become their habit, the property patrol they called it, the daily making sure of everything. "Are you happy?" Jasper asked. It was the question Martha Hennessy had asked her years ago, and she had answered then that she was managing. She thought about all the distance between that answer and this moment, the full geography of it, all the careful steps and the gradual deepening and the particular courage it had taken to let the walls down and the door in. "Completely," she said. And then, because she was Eva Monroe and precision mattered to her, "This is what I wanted when I could allow myself to want it. This exact life. Not a life without what I lost, but a life with everything I have." Jasper pressed his lips to the top of her head in the way he had of making a gesture mean more than its physical components. "I want to tell you something," he said, "that I think about." "Tell me." "The morning I rode into Caldwell," he said, "I was going to stay a season. That was the plan, work the Dawson Ranch through the winter, move on in the spring. I had no particular destination, I was just moving." "I know," she said, "you told me." "What I haven't said," he said, "is that I knew that Sunday after I first heard you speak that I was not going to move on. It wasn't a calculation, it was just knowing, the way you know when something is real." Eva was quiet for a moment. "I knew something too," she said, "earlier than I admitted." "When?" "The fence wire," she said. "When you said my horse would calm better for a stranger than for someone he trusted." "I thought that's true, and he knows it, and he's not trying to be important. He just wants the horse to be all right." Jasper made a sound that was quiet amusement and warmth combined. "It's not a romantic reason," Eva said. "It's the most romantic reason I've ever heard," Jasper said, "because it is exactly you." She laughed, which she did now without counting the cost of it, freely, and the sound of it moved across the porch and the wheat field in the last golden light of the day. In 1883, in late spring, Eva discovered she was expecting their second child. She told Jasper in the kitchen again with coffee again, and he responded with the same open, bright flooding of his face, which she had been counting on and which did not disappoint. Clara, at 14 now and considerably more sophisticated in her responses, said, "Another baby," with the meditative calm of someone adjusting a long-held plan, and then went back to her book, and then looked up and said, "I'm glad," and went back to the book again. Thomas, who was nearly 3 and had opinions about everything, was told that he was going to have a brother or a sister, and he received this information by climbing onto Jasper's lap and going to sleep there, which was his standard response to large concepts. The second baby was a girl, born in January 1884 with her father's dark hair and her mother's deliberate air, and a face that was entirely her own. They named her Margaret, after Eva's mother, and she was a winter baby, a hearthside baby, born into the warmth of a house that had been built up carefully over years into exactly the kind of home that people mean when they talk about home. Clara held Margaret with the confidence of someone who had done this before, which she had, having been 12 when Thomas arrived, and she looked at her sister's face with the evaluating gaze that she brought to all new acquaintances and said, "Hello, Margaret, I'm Clara. I'm going to have very high standards for you." "You might want to start lower," Jasper said. "Give her a few years." "Better to start as you mean to go on," Clara said, and Margaret, as if she understood, looked at her sister with the wide, unfocused gravity of a newborn and seemed to find this acceptable. The winter that Margaret was born was also the winter that Domingo Reyes finally made the decision he had been considering for 2 years, which was to go back to New Mexico, to his grandchildren and the land of his own beginning. He came to the Brenner farm on a January afternoon and sat in the kitchen drinking Eva's coffee, and told them he had decided. Clara, who was 15 by then and had been Domingo's student for 4 years, received the news with a stillness that Jasper recognized as the particular kind of controlled emotion that the Brenner women had in common. "When?" she asked. "Spring," Domingo said. "When the road is good," Clara nodded. Then she said, "You taught me everything important about horses." "Almost everything," Domingo said, with the precision of a teacher. "The rest you will learn yourself." On the day Domingo Reyes rode out of Caldwell in the early April morning, the Brenner Monroe family was there at the edge of town to see him off. Clara had braided a small piece of leather into his horse's mane, which was a thing he had taught her to do for good luck. Thomas, at nearly 4, solemnly offered Domingo a smooth stone he had been carrying in his pocket, which Domingo accepted with more gravity than most people accorded a child's gift, pocketing it with the ceremony of someone receiving something genuine. Jasper shook his hand and they held it for a moment longer than a handshake. in the way of men who know that some friendships are formed in the particular alloy of work and weather and shared purpose, and that these friendships, though they do not have the vocabulary of the conventional kind, are no less real. Eva kissed Domingo's cheek, which surprised him and then did not, because she was Eva Monroe and she had always been clear about what mattered to her. He rode south and did not look back, which was also his way, and they stood and watched until the road bend took him, and then they went home to the farm and the morning's work. The years settled into the good rhythm of a well-lived life. Clara grew into a remarkable young woman who took her schooling as far as Caldwell could offer it, and then pursued further education through correspondence and the accumulating library of books that arrived at the farm by way of various means, including Jasper's habit of bringing books from his occasional trips to Wichita for the cattle business. At 17, she announced she intended to become a teacher, which surprised no one who had ever watched her instruct Thomas on any subject from arithmetic to the proper way to feed a foal. By 18, she had a position at the Caldwell School, assisting the current teacher with the younger students, and she was formidably good at it. Thomas Monroe grew from a cheerfully reckless toddler into a boy who had his mother's precision and his father's love of the outdoors, and an absolute passion for cattle work that made Jasper quietly ecstatic every time. The boy came in from a long afternoon on the pasture, with dirt on his boots and strong opinions about the quality of the grazing. He had no interest in the school ledger that Clara waved at him, but he could read an animal's condition at a glance and manage a rope with a competence that exceeded his age. And Jasper spent long Saturday mornings teaching him cattle craft with the patient pleasure of a man passing on something he loves. Margaret turned out to be a child of startling calm and startling humor, which emerged together like two notes of a chord, and she was the one who could make everyone in the room laugh at unexpected moments, and she had a sweetness of temperament that Eva sometimes looked at and felt grateful for in a way she could not entirely articulate, as if the universe had known to provide a counterbalance to the General Eva Brenner intensity. Preacher Holt retired in 1885, the congregation throwing him a celebration that he accepted with the emotional overwhelm of a man who did not know how much he was loved until the room filled up with evidence of it. The new preacher was a younger man named Alcott, who had the energy of the recently graduated seminary and would eventually be educated by Caldwell into something wiser and more patient. At Preacher Holt's retirement celebration, he found Jasper in the corner of the meeting hall with a plate of cake and said, "I want to say something to you." "Go ahead, Aldous," Jasper said. "You are a good man," Preacher Holt said, with the plainness of someone stating a conclusion reached after considerable evidence. "And you have been good for this family." Jasper was quiet for a moment. "She was good for herself," he said. "She built everything. I just got to stay." Preacher Holt shook his head. "No," he said. "You were patient when patience was what was needed. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, quite a great deal." On a Sunday evening in October 1885, 7 years to the month from when Jasper Monroe had first ridden into Caldwell, he and Eva sat on the porch in the last of the season's warmth. The wheat field had been harvested and lay brown and shorn in the evening light. The barn stood solid and large against the sky. From inside the house came the sound of Clara at the table, the scratch of her teaching notes, and Thomas arguing with Margaret about something with a vigor that did not sound like it would end in actual damage. Eva's hand was in Jasper's, which was where her hand generally was when they were together, and neither of them spoke for a while, which was another thing they had gotten good at, the particular warm silence of two people who have run out of the need to prove anything to each other. "Do you know what I think about sometimes?" Eva said. "Tell me." "That Tuesday morning," she said, "in the church, when I was so certain I knew exactly what I was and what I would be." She paused. "I was right about some of it." "Which parts?" "I was right that I would not be replaced," she said, "that Thomas would not be erased or substituted. He is still here." She touched her chest briefly, "exactly as he always was. I was right about that. She looked at Jasper's profile against the evening sky. I was wrong about the rest. What were you wrong about? I thought love was a finite thing, she said, that it had a fixed quantity and you could use it up, that giving it again meant diminishing what had come before. She shook her head slightly. It doesn't work that way. No, Jasper said. It's more like water, she said. Clara said something when she was 7 about depth. She said something about things getting deep gradually, like water. Eva's mouth curved. She was wiser than I was giving her credit for. She generally is, Jasper said. Eva leaned her head on his shoulder. He put his arm around her. The evening star appeared over the wheat field, early and bright as it always did in October in Kansas, and the house behind them settled and breathed and held them all. I love you, Eva said. She said it still with the full weight she had always given it, no casual diminishment, and he heard it that way every time. I love you, Jasper said. All of it, always. From inside the house, something fell with a thump, and Thomas said something accusatory at volume, and Margaret's laughter rose above it like water above stones, clear and uncomplicated. Clara's voice came, firm and patient, the teacher's voice already, natural as breathing, and the argument settled. Jasper Monroe sat on the porch of the farm that was his home in the town that had become his own, in the autumn of his 7th year in Caldwell, with the woman he loved beside him and his children inside the house and the stars coming out one by one above the Kansas plain. And he thought about the Tuesday morning when he had come in for directions and sat in the 3rd pew and heard a woman state the terms of her life with such absolute conviction that he had recognized immediately, with the certainty of something finally named, that he wanted to spend the rest of his life in the vicinity of that conviction. He had been right, and Eva Brenner, who had told Preacher Holt in the most certain terms she possessed that she would never remarry, who had meant it at the time with the full force of everything she was, sat in the evening beside the man she had married and raised her children with and built her second life alongside. And she thought about the particular kindness of being wrong in exactly the right way. The stars multiplied over the Kansas plain, spreading across the vast October sky in their old extravagance, as they had since before there were towns here or churches or fields, and as they would long after, indifferent and magnificent and entirely unconcerned with the small, brave human business of loving carefully and well. But the people on the porch, in the house, in the warm lamplight and the evening quiet of a good life, they were not indifferent. They were entirely the opposite, alive to every moment of it, present to every improbable, gradual, certain thing that they had made together. And that was more than enough. That was, in fact, everything.